this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Lowe's knows Sundays are for football, so tackle your home improvement projects by Saturday and earn your Sunday with great deals on LG and Bosch appliances, select Bounty and Swiffer cleaning products, and more. Then once your to-do list is done, get ready to kick back, relax, and enjoy the game. Shop in-store or online now and earn your Sunday with help from Lowe's, official partner of the NFL.
Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zachariason.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zachariason, and this is episode 1068 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Week 14 sleeper show, it wasn't the best. There were some hits in there like Christian Watson, Tyler Shuck, Blake Corum, and Harold Fannin. Trevor Lawrence and Sam Darnold, they were both usable. Jacoby Myers got it done, Devin Neal did too, and Colby Parkinson and Dalton Kincaid both found the end zone. But the Broncos receivers weren't anything special. Chris Rodriguez was pretty mid. Adonai Mitchell and Tyrod Taylor busted, though Tyrod was hurt. And the defensive streamers were pretty bad last week outside of Miami. Miami was great. Now that it's the playoffs, more's at stake. So hopefully I can get you more W's than L's this week. With that being said, let's get to week 15. This first tier of players consists of guys rostered in 50 to 80% of Yahoo leagues, so they're shallower sleepers. Brock Purdy is still under that 80% mark, and I'm not entirely sure as to why. I'd imagine this dude was bye week last week, and he hasn't been amazing in fantasy football. But he's not a bad play this week. The 49ers have a 28.5 point implied team total against Tennessee. That's the second highest on this week's slate. You might be worried about the 49ers not having to throw the ball as much. That's fair. Teams against Tennessee tend to see their pass rate drop by 2.5% this year. But the Titans are still the 12th best matchup by adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. And as I always say, in order to get to garbage time, in order to get that lead, the quarterback is likely going to play a role. That high of a team total makes Brock Purdy a relevant starter. Jackson Dart's another one in this tier. Now, I will say I'm a little bit concerned about Dart's mobility. He didn't have a single designed rush attempt the last time we saw the Giants. That was the first time that it happened all year as starter. And we all know why it probably happened. His concussion. But the Giants do get the Commanders this week, and Washington has been the third best matchup for quarterbacks this year by adjusted fantasy points allowed. New York also has a healthy 24.5 point implied team total. So I think Jackson Dart is fine. And then Trevor Lawrence is the last one in this tier. The Jags also have a good implied team total at 26.5 points against the Jets, and New York has been an average to above average opponent this year for quarterbacks. Now, they have been better of late, but half of the quarterbacks that they've faced since Sauce Gardner was traded, they've posted top 10 numbers. Just given the team total and given the trend that I talked about on this week's 10 Trends episode about Trevor Lawrence and how well he's played since September, I think he's fine. At running back, Woody Marks is still at the 80% mark at the time of this recording. I love him this week. The Texans are favorites against the Cardinals. They have a 26 point implied team total. Arizona is the sixth best matchup for running backs by adjusted points allowed this year. And they're coming off a game where both Blake Corum and Kyren Williams were top 10 options. The week prior, Bucky Irving, RB15. The week before that, Travis Etienne, RB7. The week before that, Christian McCaffrey was the RB1. Those are a lot of good running backs, don't get me wrong. And Woody Marks isn't in that kind of tier. But each back still played above expected. With Nick Chubb banged up, Marks could see a lot of work. He had a 93% running back rush share last week. If he comes close to that against Arizona, he should have a nice day. Chuba Hubbard hit a 49% running back rush share the last time we saw Carolina. He was the better back between himself and Rico Dowdle. That was pre-bye. It was his highest share since week 8. Now, we probably are going to see a split backfield again here in week 15. But Carolina's in a spot where both running backs are in play. They get the Saints, and teams against New Orleans have seen their biggest decline in pass rate over expected compared to any other team in football. team pass rates usually drop by 7 percentage points when they face New Orleans. And this is a team, the Panthers, that have the second lowest pass rate over expected in the entire NFL. So I'm expecting a lot of running from the Panthers this week. That should benefit Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle, but he's not sleeper eligible. In that same game is Devin Neal. Neal's been getting it done without Alvin Kamara in the mix. He's had a running back rush share of 70%, 74%, and 83% over his last 3 games. He's averaging a respectable 12.1 PPR points per game in those contests. Now the Saints get a Panthers team that ranks as a top half opponent for running backs by adjusted points allowed. So I think Neal is an okay play. And then lastly is Kyle Monangai. Now I know this one might sound a little bit weird because Cleveland's a bottom 10 matchup for running backs this year by adjusted fantasy points allowed. But the Browns have not been great at stopping running backs of late. Tony Pollard last week, RB2. The week before, we had CMC as a top 12 option. Ashton Genty in week 12, RB4. Derrick Henry, the RB8 right before that. And then in week 10, so this is all since their bye, in week 10, Breece Hall was the RB7. The Bears are favorites, and Monangai's been over the 50% running back rush share mark in 3 straight games. I don't think he's a terrible play at all. Wan'Dale Robinson is still at 80% rostered, and I love him this week against Washington. Washington's allowed the 10th most adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers this year, and Robinson hasn't seen lower than a 31% target share in each of his last 5 games. But also, with Darius Slayton back and playing a full route share in week 13, Robinson went back to playing over 75% of his snaps out of the slot. That's big because Washington's given up top 5 numbers to slot receivers this year. They've allowed over 4 more PPR points per game to team slot receivers compared to the average team. Again, that's big for Wan'Dale Robinson. There hasn't been much reason to be excited about Jordan Addison this year, given the state of the Vikings offense. But if there's any week that he could be relevant, it's this one. The Vikings get the Cowboys, and Dallas has allowed the most fantasy points to perimeter wide receivers this year. It's the best matchup on paper for Jordan Addison, who runs frequently on the outside. He's also coming off of 2 games where he saw target shares of 34.5% and 30%. So I think this is a very interesting play. At tight end in this tier, we got to go to Harold Fannin, just because he's been crushing. Like I said earlier this week, no tight end has a higher target share than Fannin does over the last few weeks. Those are his games with Shedeur Sanders under center. In Cleveland this week, they get a reasonable matchup against Chicago. The Bears are the 13th best matchup on paper for tight ends by adjusted points allowed. And then the final player in this tier is Juwan Johnson. Carolina, his opponent, ranks as the 12th best matchup by adjusted points allowed, and Johnson has seen target shares of 27% and 22% over his last 2 games. I think there may be better streamers in the next tier, but Johnson should give you a good floor. Speaking of this next tier, we're looking at the rest of the players, anyone rostered in fewer than 50% of Yahoo leagues. I switched things up last week. We'll be looking at sleepers this way through the end of the year, which is just next week because there actually won't be a sleeper show in week 17. Anyway, let's start at quarterback. Let's go to CJ Stroud. We haven't gotten a ton of usability out of Stroud this year. I do think there's at least some concern with him this week because of that. But the Texans, like I said earlier with Woody Marks, they have a healthy implied team total. And Arizona, they're just an average matchup for quarterbacks by adjusted points allowed. So I think Stroud can at least give you solid QB2 numbers this week. If you want to get a little weirder, though, you could go with JJ McCarthy. I, of course, hesitate to say that because of how well he's played this year, or not well he's played, but it's Dallas. It's freaking Dallas. The Cowboys are the best matchup for quarterbacks by adjusted points allowed. The only starter to score fewer than 16 standard fantasy points against Dallas is Geno Smith. He still put up 13. McCarthy's coming off his best game of the year by EPA per dropback. So maybe that'll spill into week 15. Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers, they threw more than usual given game circumstance in week 14. That's hopefully a good sign and the start of a trend, as I mentioned on the 10 Trends episode yesterday. And this week they get a Dolphins team that's been an above average opponent for quarterbacks this year. They were fine against the Jets last week because Tyrod Taylor was hurt early, but prior to that game, you're looking at a QB 12 performance from Tyler Shuck, QB 11 from Marcus Mariota, QB 10 from Josh Allen, and QB 9 from Lamar Jackson. Miami's actually been pretty good against the run recently too, so it may force Pittsburgh to be a little bit more aggressive than usual through the air. And then I also like Marcus Mariota this week. He's had a QB1 performance in each of his last 3 starts, and Washington gets a New York team this week that's allowed the 4th most adjusted fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. So I do like Mariota quite a bit. Speaking of the Commanders, I think Chris Rodriguez is actually in a good spot this week. The Giants are the second best matchup for running backs by adjusted points allowed, and this game could be closer, meaning the Commanders could keep things ground heavy and ground friendlier for Rodriguez. It doesn't mean I don't like Mariota. I think the Commanders could score points. All I'm saying is that this is a game script that could favor Chris Rodriguez, potential game script, because he's not their negative game script back. But Rodriguez is getting double-digit carries. He's done so in 3 straight games. This is one of those spots where things could come together for him. And then another player from that game is Devin Singletary. The last time we saw the Giants, Singletary became their lead back because of a Tyrone Tracy injury. It does sound like Tyrone Tracy is okay, but I'd probably still prefer Singletary this week just because Tracy's coming off of that injury. Tracy's also been the guy running more routes and being more of the pass catcher for that backfield. But this is a game, like I just said, where they could stick to the run given they're currently favorites. This game could be close is basically what I'm saying. And Washington, they've been a top 10 opponent for running backs by adjusted points allowed. But look, you can use Tyrone Tracy as a flex option too. I just think this sets up just slightly better for Devin Singletary. But as we know, this is going to come down to a coaching decision. Fantasy managers are understandably going to gravitate towards Tony Pollard after what he did last week. But I'm here to tell you to not forget about Tyjae Spears this week. The Titans are really big underdogs against the 49ers, and in those situations, we typically see more Tyjae Spears than Tony Pollard. According to Fantasy Life data, Spears has played 75% of the 2-minute snaps since week 5. Pollard has been at 25%. Spears has seen 80% of the team's long down and distance snaps during that time. That could be big this week against San Francisco. They not only are just average as an opponent by adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, but they're the number 1 team in the league in adjusted target share allowed to the position. Spears, the pass-catching back, could take advantage. And then another player who may be able to see more passing game work is Dylan Sampson. Jerome Ford is now on IR, and he's sort of obnoxiously had a 33% route share this season. He's also seen 8% of the team's targets. Ford's also played over 70% of Cleveland's long down and distance snaps with Quinshon Judkins active this year. And that rate's been 65% in the 2-minute offense. That work could go to Dylan Sampson. He's played about twice as much as Quinshon Judkins in those scenarios. And the Browns are decent underdogs against the Bears this week. So there's a chance that we see Sampson get some action. Let's move on to wide receivers. It's actually a pretty tough week to find good wide receiver sleepers. But I've got a few for you. The first one's Luther Burden. The matchup against Cleveland, it's not anything special. They've been a fringe bottom 10 team for wide receivers by adjusted points allowed this year. But without Rome Odunze, we saw more work for Luther Burden in that offense last week. He had his highest route share of the season at 69%. That led to his highest target share at 21%. This is just a talent and general opportunity thing. He should be able to walk into 5 to 7 targets, and with his yards after the catch ability, there could be something there. Someone who does have a pretty specific matchup to exploit this week is Chimere Dike. He's been Tennessee's primary slot guy. He's also been getting route shares close to 90% each week. And he's coming off a game, he had a 32% target share last week. But DK gets San Francisco. The 49ers have allowed the most fantasy points to slot wide receivers this year. If that negative game script hits and the Titans start throwing a lot, I could see DK walking away with a lot of volume. And hopefully, fantasy points. And then I have 2 more call-outs to make that are injury related. The first one, I'm assuming that T. Higgins is going to be out this week, although that's not official. That makes Mitchell Tinsley and Andre Iosivas reasonable sleepers. The last time we saw this Bengals team against the Ravens, it was Tinsley who hit a 20.5% target share. He saw 9 targets. He just caught 2 of them for only 22 yards, but the volume was there. The problem is that the route share wasn't. It was just 62%. And that's why I think Iosivas is still the safer bet. He had a 96% route share against Baltimore, which is going to be more stable from a projection standpoint. But both of them, in what could be a higher scoring game, both of them could work. Baltimore's allowed the 5th most adjusted points to wide receivers this year. And then the other player here is Ryan Flanoy. This is only if CeeDee Lamb is out. But Flanoy should step in as Dallas's number 2 wide receiver if Lamb is out. He saw an impressive 28% target share last week. Now, last week's game, it was against Detroit. That's a much better matchup than the Minnesota matchup they have this week. But as I talked about in the 10 Trends episode, Dallas has been through these tougher matchups all year, and they've still seen production. Their 27-point implied team total, that helps things too. Now, at tight end, let's start with Dalton Schultz. The Cardinals seem to always be bad against tight ends. This year, really no different. They've allowed the 8th most adjusted points to the position and the 6th highest adjusted target share to the position. Schultz is an incredibly boring play, but in PPR formats, he can get it done. He's hit double-digit PPR points in 6 of his last 9, and his route share has consistently been over that 80% mark. Theo Johnson's another one. He's been a staple for me this year, and it's no different this week against the second-best matchup for tight ends by adjusted points allowed. He's coming off a 6-point performance against New England, so nothing special, but he did hit a 33% target share in that game with Jackson Dart back. He's typically been in the high teens, low 20s in target share with Jackson Dart. So you have to like him in this spot this week. Darren Waller didn't get a ton of run last week. He had a 59% route share, but he had a respectable 14% target share. He's been in a 15% and 14% target share over his last 2 games. This week, the Dolphins get the Steelers, and there's at least more of a chance for a negative game script against them than there was against the Jets last week without Tyrod Taylor. That means more passing and more of a reliance on someone like Darren Waller. Pittsburgh's been the 5th best matchup for tight ends this year by adjusted points allowed, too. So I'm cool with Waller. If that negative game script hits, I'd imagine his route share, it's going to increase week over week. I'll keep this one quick because I talked about him on the 15 Transaction Show, but Isaiah Likely, he gets the Bengals again this week. Cincinnati has been historically bad against tight ends this year. And Likely, he's seeing about a 17% target share in this Ravens offense since Lamar Jackson came back. And he's been outperforming Mark Andrews over their last few games. So I don't mind Isaiah Likely at all in this spot. And then I also want to shout out Pat Freiermuth. Darnell Washington's in concussion protocol. That's actually a huge deal for Freiermuth. Washington has about a 40% route share this year. Freiermuth last week saw a solid enough 63% route participation rate. I'd imagine that's going to be higher if Washington is sidelined. And Miami, their opponent, they've been the 3rd best matchup for tight ends this year by adjusted fantasy points allowed. Now with defenses this week, I did like Jacksonville, but they're rostered in too many leagues now. So some deeper plays, some sub 50% plays. You got San Francisco against Tennessee. You got Chicago against Cleveland, and maybe even Dallas against Minnesota. All 3 of them should work, with Dallas being more of that deeper play. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back in your ears tomorrow with the weekly mailbag episode.
Amazon 5-Star Theater presents Real Customer Reviews performed by Ed Helms. Tonight's review, Tactical Jacket. I was living a simple life. Didn't get out much. Then, I bought this jacket, and everything changed. Women came flocking to me from lands domestic and foreign. On the 245-day sailboat voyage home, I was attacked by a shark. I knew it was the jacket he was after. Giving up the jacket in exchange for my life. 5 stars. Amazon customer 69. Shop the perfect gift this holiday on Amazon.
Running a business is hard enough. Don't make it harder with a dozen apps that don't talk to each other. One for sales, another for inventory, a separate one for accounting. That's software overload. Odoo is the all-in-one platform that replaces them all. CRM, accounting, inventory, e-commerce, HR. Fully integrated, easy to use, and built to grow with your business. Thousands have already made the switch. Why not you? Try Odoo for free at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.